6 o'clock. We will start our meeting. If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. This is a special meeting. The purpose of the special meeting will be to discuss the Sweetwater Park project and approve some unpaid vouchers, and additional items may be added to the agenda prior to the meeting should action need to be taken. The first item is the payment of the impressed account vouchers, which is for the pay station of $734.55. Those are lease payments and merchant service fees, and the payment voucher $439.37. Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion to approve A, B, and C.
Do I hear a second? A and B, yeah.
I second that.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, so moved. Good, thank you. So let's go ahead and sign these. Oh, by the way, these have already been approved. We just need to, she cleaned up the page because the last one, so we just need to sign that. And in the meantime, while we're signing, we'd like to have the presentation from the Pacific Northwest Salmon Enhancement Group executive, who is Mendy Harlow. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
So I thought it would be a good idea to regroup and kind of give a project update. I'm going to scoot back so you guys can see the screen when it's up better. And
You want to turn the lights off? Is that a good idea?
Would that help?
Sure.
Perfect.
So
Good, thank
I
you.
visited with you all back in March of 2016. I don't know how to make that go away. Is that normally come up on your projector?
Yeah, do you know how to get that off?
Might just be, oh yeah, that's,
That's great. Okay, so I came and visited with you guys in 2016 to introduce the project again. We'd been talking about it for quite a few years, but we had at that time a conceptual design to share. So I wanted to come back again now and give you an update on where we are. So during this presentation, I'll talk about the history of the site again, because there are some new folks involved, and talk about the history of the project and EPA's involvement in the project throughout the cleanup period, and then the Department of Ecology's role in that, and then talk about next steps and kind of things that are needed to make the project move forward. So to orient everyone again, the property location is just south of the Belfair Elementary School on the Sweetwater Creek. And it is, we call it the Schindelheim property because the school district acquired it from the Schindelheim family. So a little bit of property history. It was developed in the 1930s, and there was a gas station on the site between the 1930s and the 1950s. After that point, there was a restaurant and an antique store. And then I'm unclear about what happened on the property after that. I do know that the site was graded sometime in the 1980s, and there was some talk of restoring the water wheel in the 1980s. I've received that information from our County Commissioner, Randy Netherland. He was involved with possibly restoring that water wheel. So in 1997, the North Mason School District applied for an ALEA grant through the Department of Natural Resources. And they received that grant. And I printed out the grant agreement for you all to look at. And I wanted you to pay close attention to the pink flag on there, because it is the project scope of work. And in that scope of work, it talks about the purpose of the grant and the acquisition of the property. And so the purpose was to acquire 5 acres of forested uplands on Sweetwater Creek, and it was going to result in the completion of the planned acquisitions for the Hood Canal Watershed Project. which would also result in 150 acres of upland to estuarine public land for environmental education and also for public access. So the future development of the site was to include trail construction, as well as fish ladders and the recreation of the water wheel with some electric power from that water wheel, so that it could be like a demonstration on hydropower in our area, which is a really important part of our history. So in the objective of any future development on the site was to further educate the public and students about the link to Hood Canal, estuarine wetlands, upland forests and streams, and the life cycle of the salmon, as well as other important aquatic resources. So it was really supposed to add into the existing Feller Project Center. So knowing that the site had had a gas station on it in the past, knowing that it likely had some underground storage tanks, the Salmon Center applied for what's called a targeted brownfields assessment. So that assessment basically would allow us to determine whether or not there were any things on the site that would be a concern long term. So we completed the RFP in 2003. We were approved in 2004, and we completed our targeted brownfields assessment in early 2005. So in the actual scope of the assessment was not just the school district property, but also property across the road, which was owned by the Salmon Center at the time. So during that targeted brownfields assessment, the assessment used ground penetrating radar to determine whether or not there are any anomalies in the soil. So anomalies would mean that there's something underneath the surface of the ground that is abnormal and should be investigated further. So on the school district property, which is this property here, there was an anomaly found right here adjacent to Sweetwater Creek, and then across the road there were some anomalies found as well. So on the school district property, the two anomalies turned out to be what we thought was likely two underground storage tanks, about 3,000 to 5,000 gallons in size. So since we found anomalies on the property, we automatically qualified for a cleanup grant through EPA. And so we submitted a site plan and received $123,000 to remove the storage tanks. We hired Alki Consultants in June of 2005 to oversee the cleanup, and then we also hired TNT Excavating to remove the tanks. So the two underground storage tanks were removed in August of 2005, and we also did an over-excavation of the soil to remove any soil that could be potentially contaminated with petroleum products. So following the underground storage tank removal, the property was entered into the voluntary cleanup program at the Department of Ecology. So at that time, we wanted to install monitoring wells to monitor the soil. So Department of Ecology approved those monitoring wells. And the purpose was to get a groundwater characterization of the site and also determine whether or not we had fully removed all of the hydrocarbons from the soil and surrounding the underground storage tanks. So that soil, or the groundwater, was sampled quarterly for 1 year. And following the year of sampling, the quarterly sampling, it was determined that we had fully removed all of the hydrocarbons from the soil when we did the underground storage tank removal, but there were elevated levels of arsenic in the groundwater. So I wish I could zoom in a little bit more, but the monitoring well that we were seeing the elevated levels of arsenic in was monitoring well 1, which is up here. So one of the monitoring wells had elevated levels of arsenic. The other 3 had arsenic levels that were within normal range. And I also want to point out that typically when there are underground storage tanks on a property, any arsenic on the site is not typically from those underground storage tanks, because those underground storage tanks typically had petroleum products in them, gasoline. So likely the underground storage tanks did not contribute to any arsenic at the site. So after we found that there was elevated levels of arsenic on the site, you know, typically once you go through a year of quarterly sampling and you have no metals of concern or any hydrocarbons of concern, or they're all at levels which are below cleanup, you get a letter from the Department of Ecology that is called a no further action letter. So they would not issue that letter because of the elevated levels of arsenic. So what they recommended that we do is look into this document here, which is Natural Background Soil Metals Concentrations in Washington State, and make the case that Belfair has, in some areas, elevated levels of arsenic throughout the region. Well, we looked into the cost of doing that, and in order to even get started on that and do quarterly sampling, you know, at different monitoring wells throughout Belfair, it would cost about $30,000 per year at just 2 locations, so 2 monitoring well locations. So we, at the time, did not move forward with that plan. And we saw that so monitoring well 1, which is the one that had elevated levels of arsenic, had arsenic levels that were below what this document says occurs naturally in some locations throughout Washington State. And there's another one with more arsenic samples collected in soil. So we did not pursue the no further action letter any farther because we couldn't afford to. We didn't have the funds in our EPA grant to continue on with that. So we took all of our reports and submitted them to EPA, explained to them that there's you know, elevated levels of arsenic in our monitoring wells, and let them know what we were told by the Department of Ecology about those elevated levels of arsenic. So that was February 2007. So we submitted our final report, and then in January of 2008, they closed out the grant, let us know that we were done. So at that time, I thought we were done. We had finished what we had intended to do, and we got our sign-off from EPA. Then, 2015, December, I received a letter from Ecology basically saying, hey, we're removing you from the voluntary cleanup program because we haven't had any communication with you, and we tried to reach out to you, but you hadn't responded. So during that time, there was a change in leadership at the Hood Canal Salmon Enhancement Group, and so the previous director who Department of Ecology was trying to contact didn't work there anymore, so none of those emails were received. So we received this letter along with our consultant, and basically we were notified that the property was not in the voluntary cleanup program anymore. So after that, in 2015, the red parcel, and not the pink one, but the red one, was acquired by Brian and Jackie Peterson with the purpose of helping the project move forward. So when we had talked about doing this project earlier, it was determined that that parcel would need to be acquired in order for the project to move forward, because we wanted to re-meander the stream around the water wheel pond. And in order to get a low enough gradient, we would have to use more space. So we had to have that parcel in order for the project to move forward. So the Petersons were nice enough to put their own funds out there, chase down the bank because it had been foreclosed on, chase down the bank and purchase the property. So following the purchase of that property, we moved forward with the conceptual design, and I'm going through all the elements of this project, conceptual design, because I want everyone to know all of the elements that will be really important to our community. There are a lot of good parts of this project. It's not just about fish, it's also about community access to water and about ADA access to water as well. So the conceptual design was done by Bruce Dees and Associates. And it includes a natural playground. And actually, I'm going to go back one slide to show where that playground is going to be. So the natural playground is right here with a picnic shed here. And all of this gray surface that you see is all ADA compliant. So wheelchairs can access this area. Folks who have limited mobility can access this area. So this is definitely a project that would be a benefit to our community. So also in the project is an ADA fishing dock right here, also accessible to wheelchairs. And then an interpretive trail with signage all along here. And then also, one of the coolest parts of it is so the water wheel is going to be restored. And we're planning on having an interpretive building there that would show how that water wheel generates energy and talks about the history of hydropower in our area. So hydropower is definitely an important power source in our area, and we want to show how you can have salmon habitat and hydropower working at the same time. And I talked a little bit about the ADA fishing dock already. And so I wanted to point out where those 2 underground storage tanks were located, overlaying on the conceptual design. So the 2 underground storage tanks are located in the place where the parking lot for this park would be located. So this is also the area where there were elevated levels of arsenic, and the area will be paved over and it will be a parking lot, so no one will have access to any arsenic in that soil. So just wanted to put that into perspective there as well. So wanted to talk a little bit about our successes so far. So we definitely have broad community support for this project. There's very little opposition to the project moving forward because everyone understands that it has a lot of elements in it that will be beneficial to our community. The parcel's been acquired. We've updated our conceptual design. We have 30% design documents, so we're really ready to move forward with grant applications and receive funding for this project. And it also supports a larger effort throughout Mason County and North Mason in particular to expand the trail systems in this area. We really have an opportunity here to grow our trail system and really attract some folks who are wanting to do recreational activities, hiking, biking in this area, and I think we really can build on that with this project. And then we've also gathered over 30 letters of support for the project from different organizations, including Bremerton Beyond. So it's a mobility organization that really likes to support projects that work with limited mobility people. And we also have over $30,000 of in-kind donations secured. So either building materials that have been donated from local companies or engineering and design services from local professional services. So it's definitely a largely supported project. So now there are, of course, challenges. So currently, the Schindelheim property is still owned by the North Mason School District. The school district doesn't have in their mission owning a park or maintaining a park. So they would really like to transfer that property to another entity. Since it was acquired with grant funds, it can't be just transferred to anyone. It has to be transferred to an entity that would have qualified for that grant to begin with. So that includes county government, port districts, state government, school districts. So in order for the project to move forward, we really need another entity to take on the property. And so since the port is an entity that could take it on, it would be great to get support and approval of accepting the property from the school district. So beyond that point, we would work with the port to determine like a long-term maintenance plan after development of the park. We're more than willing to use our WCC crew or our Mission Creek Correction Center crew to help maintain the property, and those would be all details that we can work out in the future, but just realize that the Hood Canal Salmon Enhancement Group would be a great partner in that effort. We already work to maintain the trail system that is on the Department of Fish and Wildlife property at the Union River Preserve. So we already have that within our scope of normal work. And then funding for the overall project is also a hurdle. As a 501c3 nonprofit organization, I don't qualify for as many grants as a port district or county government qualifies for, because if I am writing a grant to develop a park and my entity does not exist in 10 years, there is kind of this park hanging out there that does not have somebody that's responsible for it. So if we work together, we will have a higher likelihood of having this project be funded, just because there's a larger number of grants that we can qualify for together rather than apart. So
Great.
that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions that you'd like to ask?
The in-kind donations.
Yeah.
The slide said 300,000.
Yes. Yeah, and all of those contributions you can look at by accessing the, so in 2016 I applied for WWRP funds for this project. It didn't rank high enough, but all of those in-kind contributions are in that grant packet, so they can be accessed. They're a public document. So.
You had said 30 when it read 300. But
Oh,
you meant,
I'm
you
sorry.
meant 300.
Okay, yes, 300,000.
I
I'm
wasn't
sorry.
bringing it up.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'm nervous.
It's been
Great.
really well received. It's been an amazing support that we felt, a wave of support.
Yes.
Ted, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Maybe since the commissioner's here, why hasn't the county taken this over as a county park, this project?
We've never been a part of that conversation. The only thing we've been a part of is the idea of support for it and perhaps helping to go after grants. Even when we presented that way, we have a hard enough time right now managing what we have, let alone taking on another project.
And I guess the other question, Mindy, is if we were to go forward, there's still questions about that letter from Ecology and DOE.
Right, so I guess I didn't go into details there. So in order to get a no further action letter, the school district would have to enter back into the voluntary cleanup program. So Department of Ecology has no jurisdiction over the site unless we enter into that voluntary cleanup program. At that point, they would see that, yes, the arsenic levels are still elevated, and they would not write a no further action letter. We could go forward with doing monitoring throughout Belfair, but I don't have the funding to do that. So, school district superintendent is here. Might want to speak to the interest in the school district of entering back into the voluntary cleanup program.
And before I hear from the superintendent, it seems like Ecology has stepped out for the last few years because of the changeover. Has there been any attempts to bring somebody from Ecology up here and say, hey, look, this is what we're trying to do? What does your agency need to expedite this stuff so we can get this thing going?
Yes, so we have spoken with Nick Acklam at Department of Ecology. He leads this region's toxic cleanup program, involuntary cleanup program. So basically, he said that in order to get any sign off from the Department of Ecology, we would have to enter back into the voluntary cleanup program, and we would have to show 1 year of quarterly samples that had arsenic levels that were below state standards, which we don't have. Or, we could go into an effort of monitoring multiple locations throughout this region to try to determine that there is elevated levels of arsenic throughout this region.
Right. They also recognize, they acknowledge that it's naturally occurring in our area. Correct?
Yes, yeah, that's what this document's all about. So there's volcanic activity that has occurred in Washington State historically that has led to not just elevated levels of arsenic, but also many other metals that you find in areas where there's been volcanic activity.
And the plan with the pond,
Yeah.
can you go over that again? 'Cause if you go up there now, it's kind of a marsh, but
Yeah, so basically the plan with the pond, so what happens when you have basically a dam is sediment builds up behind that dam and it starts to fill in. And so that's what happened with that that site. So anytime there's a high flow event, a lot of the sediment from upstream travels downstream, and as it slows down at the dam, it drops out and hits the bottom of the pond. So the plan with the pond is to excavate it to its original size and plant it with trout, so that folks that are accessing that fishing dock will have an opportunity to catch trout out of that pond. So we've already received initial buy-in from the Department of Fish and Wildlife's fisheries biologist for this region, who is excited about planting trout into that pond.
Mindy, also, one of the concerns was about the culvert underneath Highway 3.
Yeah.
There's still fish getting up through that.
Yes.
I mean, but it's the fact that the water wheel is there with all that, you can't get through it. With this new design, fish will be able to get back up there.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct. So the problem with the culvert under Highway 3 right now is that it does not live up to fish passage standards. So if we were to install that culvert now, it would not be allowed. But when it was installed, at the time it was installed, that was the current, it lived up to the current standard. Unfortunately, it's not bottomless. So fish can't spawn underneath Highway 3, but they can still get through. We've documented fish on the east side of Highway 3 multiple times over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So they definitely get there. And so once we, and actually, one thing that would help get that culvert replaced long-term would be if there was some sort of passage around the pond instead of just a dead end at the water wheel. So there's no reason to replace that culvert under Highway 3 right now, because there's another barrier just, 20, 30 feet up. So
that could enhance the ability for us to get it widened, get it fish past.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So it could, so this, completing this project could help push the future road widening along.
And any other questions? I'll go ahead and,
Mindy, could you speak to how many fry are released through the Belfair Elementary project every year in that stream?
Yeah, so there's currently a remote site incubator that is located on school district property on Sweetwater Creek, and we release typically 120,000, sometimes up to as many as 150,000 eggs into that remote site incubator, and then they hatch and move downstream. So, yeah, so and then we see hundreds of chum return every fall as a result of that project. And sometimes we even get coho in there, but it's not super common because they don't have anywhere to go. The spawning habitat in that stream for coho is located well above the water wheel pond, and they can't access it because of the water wheel spillway.
yeah. Any more questions? And then I'd like, yes, Ken?
I just was curious, Andy, you said the chum return, but they can't get through those barriers, right?
They cannot get beyond the water well spillway. That's
Right.
correct.
And you said, when I was looking through one of the grants, that salmon historically used that stream. Do you know how long ago that was?
Before the 1930s, when the water well or water wheel was installed.
So almost 90 years ago.
Yep. Yeah, so salmon have lived in our region for 10,000 years. So it's, they lived in this place long before our impacts to this area.
Plus, they do migrate. I was told by a biologist, they will find a way if there's
Yeah.
a way, so.
Yeah, yeah,
I
for
do
sure.
have another question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
The original 97 Allyn grant,
Yes.
it didn't involve this other property.
No, so we're just talking about the property that was acquired by the school district, not the extra property. So it was not for sale at that time.
Well, in that original Allyn grant, there was plans to make fish ladders up around.
That's correct. And that property was not available at that time, and so they couldn't move forward with those fish ladders for the reason that I explained earlier about there not being an area to move the the salmon passage around the pond. So the parcel that was acquired by Dr. Peterson, the corner of it extends into the pond. So there was no way to get a fish ladder around that pond if we didn't own that property. The property was not for sale at the time.
But wasn't it planned when that Schindelheim property was acquired?
I'd have to talk to the people who wrote the grant. I wasn't here then, so I don't know. I don't know what the I don't know that they even had a conceptual design, it was just a starting place. Typically, you'll acquire land and come up with a plan to develop it later.
Yeah,
Andy?
two questions. One of them is on, I just went over the ADA pond, I've always loved that idea. Will you restrict all other fishing to just fishing for ADA, or would it be open to the public? Is the question number one. Number two is, when we were first bringing this up, and I thought about this because of your question, it was brought to the county commission for letters of support.
Yeah.
Would there be a benefit with RCO and other granted entities if we were to keep up like what we did with the North Mesa School District? We actually went after grants because they could, for certain monies to bring money for their ball field. Would we be a stronger combination if we were to team up together on the granting?
Yes, absolutely. Anytime you have more partners involved in a grant, you will score better. So yes, it would be great to partner.
Not as opposed to the board, but in addition to.
Yeah,
no,
absolutely,
that's
yeah.
I meant
Oh,
that
yeah.
literally, we went after a grant for that ball field because they didn't have access to it. So I'm wondering if there's other
Yeah,
spots,
so-
so if we were to team up, because I'm always careful never to speak on behalf of my commission, that I don't have that ability. But I do know that we did vote for letters of support for the project, so
Right.
saying that we're supportive would be pretty realistic that we'd be supportive still.
Great. I would love to come or go to the commission chambers and give this presentation as well to gain support from the commissioners, the county too. And to answer your question about access, it would be open to the public, but it would provide ADA access. I don't think there's an intention to close it to other public access.
Well, Mindy, that's been great. And since we have Dana here and we have the North Mason School District, which seems like a willing partner to transfer, or an MOU, whatever process. Anyway, we'd like you to go ahead and speak to the issue here.
Right, well, the 97 Allyn grant, the purpose of that grant was.
Would you like to step?
No, I just got off the
Gotcha.
benches, so I'd like to stay seated in the
Perfect.
front.
Thank you.
I'm kind of hobbling still.
No scooter today.
No scooter and no crutches, so I'm really excited.
Well, good.
But the purpose of that original grant was the acquisition of the land, to provide the dollars for the school district to be able to buy the land to support the future development of this project. So in discussions with RCO, the process of transferring to another governmental agency is relatively simple. The school district and the board has already taken action to allow this almost 2 years ago. The school district writes a letter to the granting agency saying, we want to transfer the grant requirements to this other agency, in this case, the Port of Allyn. The Port of Allyn writes a letter saying, we are willing to take on the responsibilities of this grant. And then they read it and determine and send us a response.
So the school district is supportive of that?
Yes, the board has already voted
Okay.
to do this
All right.
and taken all the actions that we need. And now that you might be closer to considering this, our attorney is drafting our letter.
Okay.
So,
Well, I think that's something, that's why we're here,
Uh-huh.
is to discuss that. Just a moment, Brian. So that, again, I think we need to discuss some of this. I mean, we can take action, this is a special meeting. One of the things that I needed to address too was the letter that we had originally required because of the circumstances now, at least in my opinion, but we need to talk about that, is rescinding our need for the letter so that we could move forward. So, I would like to talk a little bit about that, unless it's not to drop the bomb on you here, but, I've been on this commission a long time, and I have not ever seen something really happen in Belfair because of all the stuff that goes on, and we have willing partners, and I would be excited to see something done for the community. So, anyway, with that being said, Commission, do you have any thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I think we should discuss the letter for no further action, because that's kind of where we were last year when we first came about this. I think with the new information that you're not gonna give us one because we're not in the program that would get us a no further action letter. That, you know, we have to have a message that says, this is why we've come off that, because there is not a no further action to be had, correct me if I'm wrong, unless we were to re-enter the voluntary cleanup, which is gonna tell us what we already know, and
So they want to show that.
so they want to show us a letter anyway, so there is no opportunity to get it. And in my opinion, is that enough to stop the project? I don't think so.
Thoughts, Ted, or is it?
Well, I guess that's a question, and I'll defer to you. Is that enough to stop the project? I mean, even if it wasn't the dynamics as it is right now, for that piece of property to be developed, would that letter stop any development on that property?
The lack of a
The
letter?
lack of a letter, yes.
I don't think so, but I'm not I don't work for the Department of Ecology, so I don't know, but it's gonna be capped, it's going to be covered by a parking lot. When I talked to Nick Applin from the Department of Ecology about that fact, he said that shouldn't be a problem. So, you know, I don't know if maybe I don't know that the Department of Ecology can even write us a letter saying it won't be a problem.
I don't think they could either. And then I guess my biggest thing is if we were to enter into the MOU, I don't want another piece of property in North Mesa County to sit idle.
Right.
I'm very concerned about school safety, as you are. Having that big piece of property next to an elementary school gives me the heebie-jeebies. And so I would rather see some movement as soon as possible. And that's something that we'd have to agree upon is, you know, hey, we're not going to let this thing, we get the Mesa County Commissioners to buy off on it. They show their support, we get the grants, we do whatever, get the community involvement. 30 letters is a lot for anybody to take the time, but it'd be nice to have more. I think if people were to look at this, I know there's a lot of people that live in Belfair that used to go up there and fish when they were kids. I know they would like it, people I've talked to like the park. I think it's great, but I just don't want another piece of property to sit there and people going, what are you guys doing now?
Amen.
So,
Amen.
So part of why we're discussing this is that I need the park, or the port as a partner on the project in order to qualify for more grants. And the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program grant funding cycle starts May 1st. So if the port is willing to be a partner on this and actually be a co-sponsor of the project, then like I said, I would qualify for so many more WWRP grants than I qualify for by myself. For a 501c3 nonprofit, it's pretty much just riparian protection and urban wildlife. So those are the only two. There's 7 other categories that ports qualify for. One is trails, one is local parks. And this project fits into both of those categories. And with the match that we have in in-kind donations, that is a big part of the battle that has been basically completed for us.
Sweetwater Park is in our comp plan, so we are a partner.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything formally we would do tonight, but we are a partner in the Sweetwater Park.
I have a question.
Okay, hang on, Brian, go ahead.
Address Ted's question about school safety. Isn't there a plan to move the school or rebuild the school somewhere else? Or?
One formal one. We have.
Next
I
year.
remember
process,
hearing
Barry.
something about this, but.
Yeah, no, we have a process and we have to look at what next steps are coming. Our district is growing pretty rapidly for a district our size. We have almost 300 more students, full-time equivalent, and we did this time 4 years ago, which is a more than 10% growth. And we see that gaining steam rather than slowing down. So we anticipate the need to have not just a replacement for Belfair Elementary School, and we need to do that soon because Belfair is the oldest in our inventory and has multiple safety concerns in its construction and in its design. But we probably need to expand to at least 3 elementary schools as we move forward in the next several years. So among those, we're considering, and we actually have in the next couple of weeks, the first of a series of meetings with a preliminary facilities committee to start talking about what are the next steps, would be a replacement for Belfair Elementary School on a new site, and then eventually somewhere in the Allyn area, third elementary school. And so those are things that we're looking at. And part of that is we don't want to remodel Belfair. It's not going to be my recommendation, nor will I think anyone else that we involved will recommend that because of the design of the building and the safety concerns that it poses. In addition, the site is not a safe site either with the highway and some other geological concerns. We want to move that building elsewhere. So, yes, we're going to talk about it, but we don't have a formal plan yet.
Mark might come first.
Brian, you had a question?
Questions and more comments. First of all, thank you to the superintendent for the leadership she's shown on this issue. And you guys as well. I know that it's been a long road and you've gone through some different things, but I'm really hoping to take a step tonight and take action and let's move forward and put some stuff behind us. I loved Commissioner Jackson's comments. Let's get something done. Let's go. Let's not have something just sit there. And we have a partner. If the county joins in, it's even stronger. We have a partner with some of the legislative representatives as well that are increasingly encouraged with this project. And so I'd encourage you to also remember, we talked about the fish passage and the handicap, and it's neat to have a park, but not only is this in the comp plan for the port, but it's in the comp plan and Parks and Trails plan for the county. Last I heard, I think it was in the RTPO plan as well, that it was meant, it's in there as well. So we've got a lot of collaboration and a lot of support in a lot of different areas where we've got our I's dotted and T's crossed. The beauty of inviting the port and having the port take a leading role and partnering with Mindy is, I think at one time she told me there's 8 different funding opportunities or pots of money that the port can bring to the table that she can't just with fish passage stuff. So, and this is an economic development piece too. There's lots of studies that show parks are economic development drivers and community enhancers, and imagine someday that we develop a regional trail system that goes from Belfair State Park through the Salmon Center with an amphitheater and a Hood Canal Event Center, and later crossing into the Sweetwater Creek and up to the railroad tracks and crossing down to Coulter Creek. This is the plan, right? Crossing down to Coulter Creek and along a new trail all the way into Belfair, or into Allyn here, to the Allyn Waterfront Park. And now you've got a trail that's estuary to estuary, that's Case Inlet to Hood Canal, and it's a regional driver, it's a destination. I mean, I take my family down to the Nisqually Trail for 10-mile bike ride, 20 to 30-mile bike rides. We go and have a blast, and people will drive for it, people will go for it. How many people leave here and go to the Burt Gilman Trail or the Cushman Trail in Gig Harbor? That's the kind of trail that we're talking about in the long run. It's going to be an economic development piece. So I would love it if the port not only continued their support, but took action tonight if possible.
I'm with Commissioner Jackson.
I would just hate to see it sit idle and not make progress on it.
We're moving.
Can I add something?
Sure.
So having a letter of support from the port is one thing, but for you to be a co-sponsor for one of those other grant categories that I do not qualify for is what I would need. So I would need you to commit to being a co-sponsor in order to qualify for this.
One thing I'll get you out of the way is the letter that we required.
Yeah.
And I would like to make a statement that we rescind it. And I don't know if we need a motion or not for that, but that we rescind that requirement. Because that was one of the things that we had stated. So
I mean,
It's self-inflicted.
yeah, I don't
It
know if we
was,
have to rescind it because
but-
we just can't.
Did you pass it?
It's not.
Did you vote on it?
You did?
We
Then you need to,
rescind it
Yeah.
and vote on it.
I believe that you do need a motion to rescind.
So could I entertain a motion?
To rescind the requirement of the no further action letter to enter into an agreement with the school district.
To hear
Take
from
public
you first.
comment before.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
The requirement, I might have gotten it. I'm sorry, go ahead. Ken.
Hi, folks. Ken Van Buster.
Sit on top.
Just wanted to correct a couple things. Mr. Peterson mentioned that the park was in the Mason County comp plan. I don't think it currently is. It hasn't been approved yet. It's still in the development stage. I'm all about trails, and I've walked that trail with at least two of you and with the superintendent. The problem with trails is the long-term maintenance that's required. When I first saw where that trail was proposed to be up there, I walked it with one of the folks that wanted to invest in it, and we found a whole different route for it, much easier, takes advantage of already existing roads. So I want you to know that I'm about that. One thing that Ms. Harlow didn't touch on in her screen was the zoning issue. Right now, that property is not zoned appropriately for a park, so that would be something that would have to change. I think it's zoned R10 in part of it, perhaps the piece that,
Mixed use.
I'm sorry,
It's mixed use is what the zoning is.
but part of it is R10.
The parcel is, it's mixed use is what it
Yeah,
is.
I think I've
But-
seen that map, so,
Excuse me, part of it is R10, whether it's Dr. Peterson's property or the Schindleheim property.
Either way, that'd be a down zone though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
A down zone,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. And
well, that may be allowed use.
okay.
Can I?
We'll go ahead and let him finish, and we can,
Okay, but in any case, it was on the screen, but it wasn't addressed. And I don't think, when I walked with the superintendent, I think my wife and I both walked it with her. At that time, these folks had already done their $300,000 conceptual design, and the school district didn't know anything about it.
11,000 is not.
Okay,
11,000.
the, okay, you did your conceptual design, and the school district wasn't even aware that they were in there doing the design. They didn't seek permission, they just went and did it. The letter from Ecology, just last week I asked if that was something that had been issued. It hasn't been, as you're aware, and I think you should think strongly about re-entering that voluntary cleanup program. When I read through the Brownsfield grant, it looked to me like there might be another underground tank that was not removed. And thank you very much.
duly noted. You may not be zoned, but you know that we can do variances as well, so.
I just want to point out, we didn't just go on there arbitrarily. We've been talking, I started the process with Neil, I think around 2005 or before. And then recently we had several meetings with Superintendent Peterson. And he viewed some of these preliminary plans and knew we were planning on going through the topo and the survey and all that. So it was not unknown to any school district.
Well, I know when Ken and Larry and
I and Judy and
Leanne
Leanne
walked
walked
in.
in. We did not get school district permission, and when things were brought up to the school district, they were upset that we didn't get permission. And please ask for permission from from now on, and
Sure.
like, oh yeah, absolutely, sorry.
And many people walked up there with one of the school
Yeah.
board members. He took several people up there, two of them took several people up there on tours. So,
So, yeah, in the future, if we want to walk that, we need to get some
Just for
Yeah.
permission.
It's
Dana?
concerning to us if folks are walking on their property during the day
Yes.
when kids are in school and we're not aware, for all of the reasons that you can imagine. And I think also Dr. Peterson and Mr. Peterson had been planning this prior. Then that plan kind of got, put aside for a while. And Mr. Peterson left and didn't share that information with us. So once it came up again, then the new leadership of the district became aware of the work that had been done.
Yeah, and I gave a presentation, I think, in June of that year about the project.
I'd also just like to say, I'm not,
Randy, could you address, is that park in the county's adopted comp plan?
I just sent a text
Oh,
out
okay.
to double check. I don't want to speak out of turn. I believe that it is. I know that we've talked about it, we're trying to make sure that it was in there. Whether it was officially adopted at this point is what I can't verify until somebody gets back.
But it is
It's
in
in
the
the
Parks and
draft.
Trails comp plan.
Yeah.
And it was,
And-
I gotta tell you, it was previously in there even before the latest effort, because I worked with Ken, used to be on ACA.
Anderson?
No,
Wilson.
Ken, huh?
Wilson.
Ken Wilson. I worked with Ken Wilson on that, and he personally got that in the comp plan at that time. But we've added the, more regional trails and connectivity to it.
I think it's great if the county can be at least a supporter of it with letters
Well,
or.
we already have, that's already passed, that I'm sure of. The question that I have is, can we partner with you to help you go after more funds? To be able to team up to go after different pockets you may not have access to, like we're able to do at the school.
Yeah, that would be synergistic. That would be amazing.
So my time frame is short here. All of the WWRP grants, like I said, are due it's either May 1st or May 2nd. So it's coming right around the corner, so I need to get these partnerships set so that when I'm writing my proposals, I have
Well, in order for-
partnerships I need.
Well, I would like to move forward.
I was gonna say, in order for me to do that, or to bring it forward, you have to have done it. And Commissioner Jackson, I was thinking about it a little bit more. There may have been a purposeful reason why we weren't asked to be the ones to be the host of this. For years, there was a separation between the county and Belfair. Matter of fact, before I got elected, I was the first commissioner for Belfair in 37 years. We didn't have anything, there was always a fear that if the county got it, and if it was the counties, that they maybe would lose control of it completely. I remember those discussions now, it just took me a while before it to come back. And the idea for myself, and I'm not speaking to Commissioner anybody else, I like the idea of it being maintained and held and owned by the local people here. Because the truth is, after I'm gone, that next person may be from, Matlock again, or Potlatch, or Skokomish, or, because it's gonna be rezoned, the whole districts will. So it'd be smarter to make sure we keep control of it locally.
One more little piece, I just wanted to address one of the comments that Commissioner Jackson made, valid comment about, hey, it's right next to the school. And one of the things that we had to deal with Superintendent Peterson prior was that when we go forward with it, we would have not only an MOU or whatever in terms of or a use agreement, but we agreed to put a fence along that property line, a 6-foot chain link along that property line because of the kids. So kids couldn't access down or anyone else would be accessing up. So that was something that Mr. Peterson had talked to us about. So.
I think it's safe to say that we all,
All know what a long-term commitment anything we do is. I mean,
Yeah.
to have that brought up time and time again, we know.
Yeah.
This park is a long-term commitment, this building is a long-term commitment, our water system is a long-term commitment. Everything we own is a long-term commitment.
Go
I mean,
ahead.
we have no doubt that this is a long-term commitment, but it's not news to us to hear it and not do it because of it.
Well, and the nice part, if we do become, which anxious to get some votes going here, that, you know, with the Salmon Enhancement Group can get the grants to maintain. And we can, too, I think, so.
Partners were strong together.
Correct, yes.
The first item I would like to clean up is the letter.
Like a motion to rescind?
I have one more question.
Okay.
On the property. How does the transfer of property work? Did you just explain that? It's a letter and a
Yeah,
letter?
the way that the NCO official explained it to me is we both write a letter and we submit them, and then they approve the transfer.
And I think it's important to note that
There's not new ownership, there's just new management.
Right.
Public still
Basically,
owns the property.
We got the grant to purchase a property, and so when we do this, we're transferring the responsibilities of the grant, which in this case is to own the property. So we write the letter saying that we're doing that to you. You write the letter saying you're accepting those responsibilities, and we submit them.
So technically, was it ever school district property?
Or was it always,
We
Yeah,
bought
it's-
it.
It's school
so
district.
it's,
It currently
okay,
is.
so you'll be transferring property
Yes.
to us.
And our lawyer would meet with your lawyer to actually draw up documents. I mean, there's
Yeah.
transfer of title, or there's MOUs, but I think transfer would
Right.
probably be more solid
Yes.
and more beneficial for grant purposes.
How long does that process take?
Well,
What I'm concerned with is the deadline for
I think-
grant submission.
I think if it's underway, Mindy said that they could go ahead and move forward with the grant submission. So once we submit the letters, it's not a very long process.
So in actually, the port doesn't have to own the property in order for you guys to be a partner and support as a grant partner. But the school district doesn't want us writing grants for a park on their property. And so
Last question. The Peterson's property,
Playing out.
So we would purchase with grant funds the Peterson property at the cost that the Peterson family paid for it, plus any insurance that he's paid for it and taxes. So I don't know exactly what that number is. I'm thinking it's around $18,000 to $20,000 for purchasing the property.
Probably gonna be about right. I submitted the letter to you, a copy, because people couldn't find the copy, but that's a copy of the letter assuring, there's been several Orwellian propaganda efforts around this purchase of the property, and it was a truly altruistic effort to support this project. So, I've submitted that letter again to you tonight to make sure you'll have copies. The intent is simply to not have any profit, but just to be repaid back.
the grants we're putting in for in May, would that be part of the property purchase? Would that be part of that? Thank you, that was it.
No?
Clear on the motion that I'm about to make, so I'm going to form it as a question first, and then I will put it forward as a formal motion.
Okay.
Port of Allyn would like to rescind our requirement for a EPA
No,
Department of Ecology.
DOE, no further action letter. And I'd like to say, because, we in essence are unable to get that in the current configuration.
Okay. That sounds good to me.
Nobody will ever be able to get it.
Yeah. So I would
Yeah.
move that
That's on tape.
that we rescind our requirement for a letter of no further action from the EPA in regards to the Schindelheim property in Sweetwater
Deal.
Creek.
Yeah.
Did I say?
Okay, do I hear a second?
Hey, second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, so moved.
Apologize for having
Okay.
EPA on the brain.
I feel comfortable to ask for another motion to enter into an agreement with the school district, is that correct? For the transfer of the property? Not only the school district property, but the Schindelheim, or do we keep that separate?
It's
The school district.
The property is the school district's property, so
Okay.
it's the property and the grant responsibility.
Okay, all right. Randy, you do have a question, or?
I don't know if this will
Before-
help you, but I just looked it up. R10 parks are allowed.
R10 parks are
Yeah,
allowed.
if he's correct, and
Okay.
and it is R10, it is an allowed use.
Yeah,
So, just to let you know that.
well, good. Thank you for that clarification. Wonderful.
Okay. Are we ready to move forward for an?
Did you make the motion?
I can't.
Okay.
I'm a chair, so I'm not
Ted, would you like
supposed
to make that
to.
motion?
I'll leave it to you. You're
Okay.
you're batting 100 right now.
Do not say EPA.
Yeah. Dead on arrival,
So,
right? No,
I
DOE.
know. So I would move that the Port of Allyn enter into an agreement to acquire the Schindelheim property that the school district acquired under the Allyn grant of 1997.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I second it.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye?
Aye, so moved. So we need to give you a letter, and you need to give us a letter, and then our lawyers will draft up the agreements, correct?
Right,
And-
well, our lawyer currently is drafting my letter for me,
Okay.
so I can send that to you with the draft form, and then we can get them together.
Okay, that's great. I'm excited.
Send it to me.
Yeah, that's who I was going to
I'm
send it to,
excited.
and Jared with that.
Yeah.
Can I ask one
And-
other, well, what's the regulations going to be on the pond? Fishing regulations?
Oh.
Of course you would ask
That's pretty funny.
Perfect.
Can I ask a question though? So am I free to work with Larry to have these grants be co-sponsored by the program, or do you guys need to make that motion?
We should make a motion to authorize Larry to do so. So I need another motion.
I would move that we authorize our executive director to work with the Salmon Center on co-sponsoring grants for the Sweetwater Park project.
Do I hear-
I second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, so moved. Good. I'm excited.
Good job up there, too.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you so much
Yeah,
for the
thank you.
leadership.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
We've worked on this for over 15 years, and I know all the loopholes, and I know all the speed bumps, and this is a really exciting night for the community. Really.
If I could just chime in, I mean, this is, when Minnie showed me this plan,
I liked it a lot for our community. But I'm going to reiterate, I just don't want to sit. And I know you've been pushing the heavy barrel for 13 years trying to get it done and all this stuff. And as a new commissioner, all we need is information. That's all I needed, is to figure out which way to push this. Because I know my kids, your kids, grandkids will love this park.
It's a
So,
special project.
Yeah.
And I know Representative Griffey is really excited about it too. He's on a train to review it with a few of us independently and in a group setting, and he's excited to help and get his legislative team on board as well. So it's really an exciting time for Belfair, for North Mason.
Thank you.
You don't need a motion for what I'm going to ask, just let you know before you do it. If you don't mind, if you could, Larry could work with you to come up with some of the different ideas or different pots of money where we can maybe help to apply. Write me a simple letter on behalf of the court requesting that we do it, I can get it on the agenda right away, and we can start to go through the process. So, if you just put that forward, and just so you know, I double checked for the mixed use parks are allowed there as well. So, whichever one it is, you
That's
should
great.
be fine.
Thank you, Randy. That's great.
I don't know if we need a motion to do that, but.
We can just give Larry direction.
Sure.
Write a letter.
Okay, so we're directing you.
Okay.
Go for it.
So direct.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Was there old business? We have old business, or?
We have a couple of other
So,
things on new
yeah, there was
business.
something under there.
Okay,
Discussion WPPA meeting in Vancouver. I just want to confirm that Judy and Scott are going, Ted is not.
Going, yes.
yes.
Okay,
And that is May
yeah,
8th, correct?
yeah.
Okay.
And update on Kitsap Bank Services. We met with Jamie Freeman this morning about changing how we're doing some things. Rather than, what we want to do is move to the automatic clearinghouse mode that they have, and it will require less work from the county, and it'll save us money as well. In fact, that we'll be able to pay bills directly right out of bias,
Excellent.
Yeah, and we won't have to, ACH is $20 a month and 12 cents a transaction. Well, for every warrant that we send, it's 45 cents to mail it.
Yeah.
Plus the labor of putting it in an envelope and taking it to the post office and all of that
So
stuff.
ACH can be done right out of bias.
Yep.
Yeah, great.
Just
And
vendor
same thing,
profile.
we can do direct deposit for paychecks,
Oh,
you know, your paychecks and staff paychecks.
wonderful.
So, and
Okay.
same thing with tax deposits, so I mean, it just makes it very much easier, and we can pay bills, you know, to our vendors that way, as well as, you know, get paid that way, so.
Good. Great. Good news. That's great.
Yeah.
Anything
And we're,
else?
and we're gonna do mobile deposit also, where we take pictures of the checks.
Yeah.
And because one of the issues that we have, and we can use ACH for this as well, is being able to transfer the money down to the county. You know, it's always been kind of problematic because of the way money comes in here when it gets done. This way we can do it in bias automatically.
Great.
Beautiful.
Anything else for the good of the order?
And that was all I had.
Okay. Randy?
I'm going to throw somebody under the bus.
Uh-oh.
I'm hoping you will please ask our superintendent to tell you some of the best news I've heard in a long time coming to our community that she has put together for our kids.
Okay, Dana.
Good in the order.
This is pretty impressive. Wait to hear.
We're very excited. We're partnering with Peninsula Community Health for student health services on our campuses. So we will have a student health center opening on the secondary campus next fall. And as part of that effort, we will have visits to the elementary schools for things like, well, child checks and shot clinics and different things so that families will be able to access services. We'll also have like sports medical clinics before the season so that kids will be able to get those. And in our partnership with Peninsula, they will do all the billing for families that have insurance and for Medicare for families that don't. And then there are other funds for families that don't qualify for either. So nobody in our school will ever have to not do a sport, for example, because they can't get a physical. And then
And is there a possibility for some mental health?
there will be mental health services as part of our.
That
I
is
told you,
wonderful.
this is the
So
most
we're very
incredible thing.
excited.
Wow, that is
So excited.
wonderful.
That is wonderful.
That is really
Good
nice.
job.
Thank you,
Great.
Jana.
Way to jump out.
Yeah, nice job on that.
Yes.
We're very, very
Thank you.
excited.
Thank you. And thank you, Randy, for waving the flag on that.
I'm more excited to get that. This is great.
Well, good job, everybody. I'm really excited to move forward with this. I'll tell you, it's been a long time. You know, it's been a long time. And thank you. Thank you very
13
much.
years.
Thank you, commissioners, for moving forward.
If I can help in any way, please call me, tell me what you need.
Oh,
Directly.
count on it. Count on
You need
it.
to partner with them
Yeah,
officially.
Just give me something in writing what you need, so I can get it on the agenda when we have it.
okay.
Thanks, Randy.
Well, I can't say that.
I know.
Put it in
Yeah,
front of
right.
us, we will argue it out.
You will
great.
get it in front of the commissioners. That's what you'll make it.
We have a very supportive commission group for North Mason right now. It's, the opportunities are wonderful.
That's great. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, meeting adjourned.